hear me clearly and see the screen, the slides that I'm sharing here. Give everyone just a quick few seconds to join in, grab your headphones or your coffee, wherever you may be right now. This is part of the YouTube live series that GMAT Club is doing in partnership with various companies. Today it's Admissionado, and I'll start the presentation momentarily at the brief intro about us and who we are, and then we'll dive into today's topic, which is the Wharton team-based discussion. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started officially. As more of you join us, thanks for tuning in today. My name is Doris Huang. I'm a senior consultant with Admissionado. We are a admissions counseling consulting company focusing on MBAs specifically. We also do undergrad admissions consulting. But I work on the MBA side, and we're longtime partners at GMAT Club. We're very excited to be here with you today to talk about the Wharton team-based discussion. I'm guessing many of you who've tuned in, or perhaps all of you, have gotten invitations to participate in the TBD in the coming days. So congratulations if that's the case. I'm sure you're all eager to hear how you can best prepare, because I know those are starting very soon. So again, welcome. A quick bit about me before we get started. Actually, I'm going to switch to this next slide here. Let's talk about what the session is going to cover today. So again, my name is Doris. I am a Wharton grad from the MBA class several years ago, and I've been with Admissionado for several seasons now. I don't just work with clients who've applied to Wharton, but Wharton is obviously one of the schools that comes up quite a lot with folks who come and work with us. I wanted to preface this conversation by saying that it's a weird beast, this team-based discussion, and it throws a lot of people for a loop because it is not something that you encounter very commonly. It can feel very constructed and very awkward. And so don't panic if that's how you're feeling, because everybody feels that way going into this. I did want to give a quick bit of background, though. Again, coming out of Wharton, I can tell you that teamwork is an extremely important component of the Wharton MBA experience. And it's something that you'll hear all the top business schools talk about how important collaborative learning is. But again, I can personally vouch for the fact that at Wharton, teamwork is extraordinarily emphasized throughout all of your classes, first year, second year, outside of class as well. Everything is done collaboratively. And I think what Wharton is trying to do here by making a team-based discussion part of the admissions process is they're telegraphing the importance of team learning, but they're also trying to make sure that the students that they ultimately select for admissions and who ultimately choose to enroll have what it takes to be a great team player. It's extremely important to the school. And so that's where this is all coming from. It's not meant to be a torture device. It's not meant to be some sort of weird mind game. It really is an integral part of Wharton's philosophy and culture. So that's what, if you keep that in mind, I think that'll help you ground your preparation and the experience itself when you're going through the TBD. So today we're going to talk at a high level at first about how the TBD works. We're going to do some do's and don'ts, but illustrated through specific scenarios, no names or anything. They've been anonymized, but real life situations that you may encounter if you end up in a TBD in the coming days. And then some tips, some advice for how best to prepare, and then how to really ace that TBD at the end of the day. Let me just make sure real quick, pardon me while I just jump screens. Okay, just making sure you guys can all hear me and we're all good to go. So let's start at 10,000 feet above sea level, and let's talk about what the point of the TBD is, okay? And there's a slide, I'll give you a quick preview. There's a slide after this called What's Not the Point of the TBD. So let's just ground ourselves with what the purpose is of this. What is the admissions committee, or the AdCom for short, really looking for here? First of all, the most important purpose of the TBD, as I just alluded to a minute ago, is to observe how well you play in a professional team setting. This is no different than how you would be evaluated by your boss at work if you were in a team setting as well. If you thrive there and if you are a team contributor in that kind of setting, this is no different. This is exactly the same kind of environment that they're testing you in. The reason for this is because, as I mentioned before, if you are a terrific team player, that is going to be an important indicator of success at Wharton. So if you can show in this quick 35-minute exercise that you're really excellent in a team setting, most likely you're going to perform very well if you enroll at Wharton as well, because as I mentioned, in classwork there and extracurriculars, teams are so critical. In addition to this, Wharton is very much of the belief that if you are a great team player, you're also going to succeed in the boardroom, in the C-suite, in an entrepreneurial setting, just in your professional life when you're an alumnus. This is an important characteristic that they look for. So at the end of the day, that is what this exercise is designed to test. It's also meant to gauge your level of interest in and commitment to Wharton specifically. There's a reason why the prompt is specific to Wharton and it's not just a general business topic, because that could be possible too. They could choose a current event, they could choose something from the business news, from the Wall Street Journal recently, and they could ask you guys to debate it and come up with a point of view. They don't do that. They actually choose a topic that is specific to Wharton for this very purpose. They want to see that you've done your homework on the school and that you're serious in your application to the Wharton program. Fine, this is important too. Many of our applicants who've gone through the Wharton interview in round one have told us that the feeling they got was that the admissions committee was really trying to weed out bad apples with this exercise rather than trying to proactively admit students. So think of it this way, the TBD, it's more likely that the TBD will kill somebody's application than it will make someone's application, right? So there are many ways to do poorly in the TBD. What you want to do is avoid those situations. To do well in the TBD, frankly, is, again, if you show your team spirit, you show that you know how to manage a group dynamic, that's much more important for success rather than winning. I'm going to touch on that in a minute. But again, just a quick refresher, please really take note of the screen. Feel free to take a screenshot as well. And this stream should be recorded, so you can come back and listen to this later this week if you'd like. But this, I would say this slide is one of the most important ones we're going to cover today. On the flip side, what is not the point of the TBD? As I said, it's not about winning. So the purpose of the TBD is not to see if you or your idea that you put forth at the beginning of the discussion prevails. This is not the Hunger Games. It's not about winning and making sure that your idea is the one that comes out on top. Because at the end of the day, if you're in a group of 5 or 6 people, chances are any idea that the group may gravitate towards at the beginning of the discussion is going to evolve and change and hopefully improve over the course of that team discussion. That's the whole point of it. So don't be preoccupied about making sure that you are going to advocate for your idea to the death, because that is not what the AdCom is looking for. Additionally, this is not a one-on-one interview, which, there will be a one-on-one interview component, which we'll touch on briefly. But unlike a lot of other business schools where you sit for 45 minutes with an admissions committee member or with an alumnus, this is not to learn all about your resume and goals. So you might have an opportunity to briefly mention something in your work experience if it's relevant to the discussion at hand. And in that one-on-one 10-minute segment that you'll have at the end of the interview, you will also have an opportunity to bring up anything that you think is really compelling or important about your application. But that's not the goal of this kind of interview. So keep that in mind as well. And finally, it's also not, the purpose is not to test your knowledge of Wharton in great detail. It is important that you do your research in advance, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is a team discussion. This is not a research report. You're not here to recite long lists of facts that you've gleaned about Wharton from doing online research, from visiting the campus, talking to alumni. That's important to inform your perspective as you go into the team discussion. But that is not, at the end of the day, what the AdCom is going for here. Okay, let me just pause here too and mention that I think we'll do this at the end of the session. If you have any questions that come up in the course of listening to this, please just jot them down. And at the end, we'll make sure to carve out some time and you'll all be welcome to enter your questions via chat in the YouTube feature, and we can take some questions at the end. So please just hold on to those, take note of them as we go along. Okay, so having covered what the TBD is about and what it's not about, again, keep that in mind as we go through this discussion. Let's just talk about nuts and bolts for a second. So how does the TBD actually work? Again, most of you, if you've gotten an invitation, you should know this already. It's pretty basic stuff, but let's just cover it quickly. It is a 35-minute team discussion. There will be a group of probably 5 to 6 of you in an online virtual conferencing room. Now, it used to be in person. Of course, that is not the case with COVID this year. Every candidate will get a 1-minute opening statement to basically, postulate what you think the best idea is for the topic, which, again, if you've gotten an invitation, you'll know that the topic this year asks the team to come up with a great idea for young alumni engagement. So this is a real challenge that the Wharton alumni Relations Office is facing. They want to figure out how better to engage young alums. And so they want you guys to put on your thinking caps and figure out, what do you think the Wharton team should do? What do you think the Wharton Alumni Relations Office should do? So you will each get 1 minute to start to put forth some sort of opening statement on this topic. Then we shift gears into the team discussion, and the team is expected to reach an actual conclusion in the form of a mini presentation. Obviously, it'll be quite brief. It won't be that formal, but you are expected to come to some sort of recommendation together as a group by the end of the session. And that's really not a lot of time. If you think about your work meetings and how much you can actually accomplish in about 30 minutes once everyone has a chance to speak at the beginning, it's really not much time. So it's a highly condensed and compact exercise. At the end of that, you will be placed in a waiting room, in a virtual waiting room, and called back one at a time into the main room to meet with the AdCom facilitator. And that person will have been present for the entire conversation, the team-based portion, so they will have that context when they speak with each of you individually for 10 minutes. And once you've done your interview, your 10-minute interview, you are free to go. So that's how it works on a basic level. Let's shift gears now that we understand what the background is and what the expectations are. Let's talk about some do's and don'ts. And again, I'm going to do this in the form of specific scenarios. And I want you guys all to keep in mind two things as you're listening to these scenarios. Number one, think about how, if you were the person that I'm going to be describing in each of these scenarios, think about how the behavior that I am going to explain would reflect on you if you were that candidate. Okay, so I want you to put yourself in that person's shoes for a minute, and also put yourself in the shoes of the other candidates who are in the team discussion with you, and what kind of impression would you be giving off to them as well as to the AdCom member who's facilitating. But the second twist I want to put on this too is, what happens if you're actually not that person, but you land in a team discussion where somebody else is that person, right? Because that's highly likely to happen as well. You can't control that, but there are certain things that you can do for yourself if you end up in a team-based discussion where you find a problematic candidate. So we'll look at that angle as well. There are three scenarios we're going to go through. The first one is what I'm going to call the shark, okay? And I'll just read this out to you guys. Candidate A sets an aggressive, self-centered tone in her opening 1-minute remarks. As soon as the facilitator opens the team discussion, she grabs the spotlight and refuses to relinquish it. We all know people like this, right? Each time someone tries to take the conversation a new direction, she tries to steer it back towards her own idea while criticizing others' points in an unconstructive way. The team runs out of time to reach a recommendation before the session is up. Okay, so you can see right away that the problem that this type of candidate, we're going to call them the shark, creates for the team. Because remember what I said, the team actually does have an objective set by the admissions committee, which is you are meant to come up with a group recommendation at the end of 35 minutes. So the problem with someone like this is that they tend to derail the entire exercise. And it's entirely possible that because of this person's behavior and how the other team members respond to him or her, it could actually stymie your objective. You may not actually reach the goal. Now, let's talk about if you were this person and why not to be this person, right? So I think this, when you put it on paper like this, it's pretty obvious. And again, think back to real life situations you've been in, whether back in undergrad when you worked on group projects, or more appropriately on teams that you've worked on in your professional life. Nobody likes to deal with the shark, right? They hog all the attention. They always want to have the floor. They don't acknowledge others' contributions. This is a major problem. So I think it's pretty obvious why you do not want to be this person. Now, it's important to have the self-awareness that you may not realize that you may be coming off in this way. So I think it's important to get, what I'd recommend to you in your preparation in the next few days is, talk to, if you can tell colleagues that you're applying to business school and you have friends or peers who are aware of it, get some feedback from them. Ask them candidly, hey, I'd love your help as I'm preparing for this Wharton team-based discussion. What is your sense of what I'm like in a team setting? When I'm with 4 or 5 people in a virtual a Zoom meeting or a Google Meet meeting, tell me how I come across to other people. That can actually be very, very honest feedback and useful for you. You might find that someone says, hey, you know what? You actually get a lot of airtime, and maybe you want to tone that down. Maybe you want to keep an eye on the clock so that during those 35 minutes, you literally are keeping track of how many seconds or how many minutes you're speaking for. And if it's, a group of 6 people and you're talking more than 25% of the time, that's probably a sign that maybe there's some behavior that, we might call a shark, even if you have the best of intentions, right? So it just takes self-awareness. And again, it's great to get feedback if you can from people you've worked with. Maybe in a prior job, you can say, hey, I'm going to be in this team-based setting. Can you tell me a little bit about how I come across in a group? Because oftentimes we don't realize this ourselves until we get that feedback. The other thing I do want to touch on is, what if you land in a group that has a shark in it, right? Don't panic, because it's not your fault, right? And it's important to keep in mind that the AdCom is not going to penalize you or your teammates if you have one of these people in your group that has nothing to do with you. You're not responsible for it. However, the important thing to keep in mind here, don't just throw your hands up and surrender. The important thing to keep in mind is that how you respond to a shark who's in your midst is actually very, very telling as well. Again, we all deal with people like this in our working lives. So this is a real life situation that can come up. Some tips that I would give you, and again, think back to what you've done or what you've seen other people do. Maybe one of your peers or perhaps your supervisor is really skilled at dealing with someone like this. Bear in mind that the facilitator probably is not going to step in this case, unless it gets really out of hand, right? The whole point, it's almost like a psychological experiment where the facilitator is really a fly on the wall. He or she is going to be observing how you and your teammates handle this kind of conflict. One thing to try is to, attempt to address the shark. So maybe you say, candidate A, we really appreciate your contributions. However, there's a whole nother angle that we're not considering here. And that might be an opportunity for you to put forth your argument, and perhaps one of your teammates will jump on that. And then, together, maybe one person can't steer the conversation away from the shark, but perhaps two or three of you together can. I think it's also important to maintain your composure when you come across somebody like this. So keep your calm. Again, address that person, politely and courteously, and say thank you for the point that you've made. Perhaps I agree with X, Y, or Z. However, and then that's where the grace that you see great communicators who have that grace, that ability to segue the conversation neatly. It doesn't make the shark feel attacked. I think that's important to keep in mind. It makes them feel acknowledged. But by the same token, you are able to, through your words and through your body language, you're able to respectfully steer the conversation in a different direction. So those are just some ideas for how to deal with this kind of situation. Again, the most important thing is to not panic and to realize that you still have tools at your disposal, even if you have somebody like this in your group. And how you react, how you respond to that is actually a great opportunity, because it's going to be very obvious to the AdCom member that the shark is a problem, right? And most likely they're going to be a bad apple who gets weeded out. So don't worry about them. Don't worry about him or her. Worry about yourself and how you respond. And again, think back to how you've dealt with these people in your own jobs. That's the best possible preparation you can give yourself. Let's move on to scenario 2. This is, we're going to use the animal analogy again here. I don't have animal analogies for all three, but for this one I do as well. This is the peacock, and I'm sure you can imagine this type of person. I'm sure you've also encountered these folks in your professional lives. So candidate B rambles on and on during his 1-minute opening statement, only stopping when the facilitator cuts him off. Each time he speaks, he either spews Wharton facts that seem unrelated to the topic at hand, or he tells stories about himself and his background that are of questionable relevance to the prompt. The team finds its focus drifting off topic constantly. Okay, so again, I'm sure, hopefully you guys are thinking back in your memories about situations you've been in like this before with groups, because we all encounter people like this. So these people are show-offs, right? They want to be heard. They want to make sure that it's a little bit different from the aggression of a shark who wants to really control the conversation, who really wants to force his or her opinion or perspective on the group. This is more about showing off. This is more about, this person wants to showboat. They want to make sure everybody knows how important they are and how smart they are, right? So again, just as my advice, the advice that I gave to you before was relevant for the shark, same thing applies here. Don't panic if you have one of these people in your group. Chances are, by the end of 35 minutes, he or she will make a fool of themselves and in front of the admissions committee member, and they will take care of that. So don't worry about that person. But again, it's important to think about how you respond to this type of person. Again, very similar tactics that you would use to deal with a shark. Focus on acknowledging him or her. But again, the important thing to keep in mind, as I said here, the team finds its focus drifting off topic constantly. The problem when somebody talks constantly about themselves is that oftentimes you end up losing the thread of the actual exercise, right? You're actually wasting time and being distracted from the prompt, which is important. So the thing here to do is to make sure that you keep bringing gently, respectfully thank the person for their contributions and say, wow, it sounds like you have a lot of relevant experience. Maybe do a little bit of ego stroking, but then make sure that you bring the focus back to the prompt, to the exercise that you guys are doing as a group. And I think another important thing you can do here is appeal to the other group members, right? So you might say in those opening remarks, take notes of what people say during the opening 1-minute statements, because maybe one of the other candidates, they mentioned something in their opening statement that you love their idea, or it's the same idea you had, or perhaps they mentioned a work experience that you think is very relevant to the solution, the recommendation that you want to come to. You can say, hey, candidate B, really appreciate, the experience you've had. But you know what? I actually think candidate D over here mentioned in her opening remarks that blah, 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 blah. And now all of a sudden you have masterfully recruited candidate D to help you steer the conversation back to where it needs to be, because chances are you're not the only one in the room who's sweating and thinking, how are we going to get this exercise done? So I think acknowledging the person who's speaking, bringing the focus back to the topic at hand, that is a skill that is a good one to demonstrate in this exercise. And then appealing to the other candidates who may be listening in, build some rapport with the people, even if they don't have the microphone, build some rapport with them and try to appeal to that group dynamic. Okay, we're gonna move on to scenario 3. So again, I don't have an animal analogy for you here, but the wallflower, right? And again, this I think speaks for itself. You can understand why you don't want to be this person. Candidate C speaks so softly during his opening remarks that the others have a hard time understanding him. His video image is dark and difficult to see. He doesn't assert himself in the team discussion, so he doesn't have any opportunity to contribute to the conversation, nor do any of the other candidates make any attempt to include him in the discussion. By the end of the TBD, nobody has a clear idea of what his ideas or position are. Again, I think this one is quite self-evident why you don't want to be this person. If you don't have a voice in a group of 5 or 6 people over the course of 35 minutes, the AdCom has nothing to go on, nor do the other teammates. They don't have any sort of material or content to work with, no signals about this person. What is maybe he has a very highly relevant experience in his background. Maybe he has a brilliant idea, but if nobody coaxes it out of him and he doesn't volunteer it, then the group, the ultimate end product suffers, because the result could have been perhaps improved by his contributions, but we never learned it, right? So I don't think I need to tell you guys that you don't want to be this person. You don't want to be candidate C. Now, if you happen to be more soft-spoken by personality or by nature, or more shy, that is okay. Again, think back to all the experience. The great thing about this is it's such a reflection of real life, right? You've all worked in companies, large and small, organizations, governments. You've worked with team members before. You perhaps have been this person in certain meetings, or you've seen people, colleagues who are like this. So draw on your own experience. That's why the Wharton team-based discussion shouldn't be as scary as it sounds, because it is meant to be a microcosm of that collaborative dynamic that you go through in your everyday work life. So if you do happen to be someone who, again, like I said, is more shy or soft-spoken by nature, think about how you've worked to counter that in work situations. Maybe you make it a deliberate goal of yours in a 1-hour-long meeting. You're going to make at least 1 or 2 contributions. You're going to raise your hand, and you're going to make sure that you've prepared points in advance, and you want to make sure you would get at least one or two of those across. That could be a good tactic for you, is to make sure you have enough points that you have the opening 1-minute remarks, by the way, so you're guaranteed airtime. And then after that, maybe you say to yourself, I'm going to say at least one other thing in response to somebody else, or to put forth my own opinion, right? So maybe it's about setting a metric, like an actual KPI for yourself during the course of the 35 minutes. The other thing you can do, again, if you're shy, it's always the great thing about the team discussion is you can build off of other people's points. So you don't have to feel like, oh, the person who talked before me stole my point and now I have nothing to say. You can build on that. And if you were to actually sit in on a Wharton class, you would see how that's actually a very important learning mechanism. Is, somebody makes a comment and perhaps it shifts your thinking, or it triggers a memory for you, and then you're able to build upon that. And again, that usually gets to a better result at the end of the day. AdComs love to see that. They love that. That is collaborative learning. Collaborative learning is not about, each person makes their point, and then at the end of the day, everyone votes on a winner. That's not how it works. It's about building, and it's about shaping the complexity and the sophistication of an idea together. So that's also a great way. If you tend to be more shy, you can build on what someone else has said before you, and that's a great way to connect. Again, create that rapport between you and other candidates during the what is otherwise feels like a very competitive environment. Now, if you have someone like this in your group, this is actually, and you may not be a wallflower yourself, but this could be an opportunity for you to actually demonstrate your ability to engage others in the conversation, right? So think about, we've all encountered people like this who are very masterful at ensuring that everyone's voices are heard, even if you're not the authority in the room, right? You're not the facilitator, you're not the professor, you're not calling on people, but perhaps, again, best way to do this is to really pay attention during those opening remarks. Literally take notes, have a notebook next to you, write down, every person's name as they speak, and, just a couple of bullet points about what they say. That can be a really great way. If you notice it's 25 minutes in and you're about to come to recommendation, but you realize that candidate C, you're seeing them on your screen, they haven't said anything the whole time. This could be your chance to show that you are really great at engaging people who might not be as comfortable speaking out. So you might say, oh, wait a second, candidate C said at the beginning of the team-based discussion that, they're very active in their undergrad alumni association. Well, maybe I use this opportunity to speak up and I actually say, hey, candidate C, I remember that you said in your opening remarks that you're president of the alumni association of, whatever college. I'd actually love to hear what you think about this idea that we've all come up with. And then you're inviting that person to step into the conversation, showing that you also have the awareness that you haven't heard from everybody in the team, and that you have, again, the good grace to actually proactively reach out and bring that person into the fold. That can be, even if, again, it's not about your idea, but that simple gesture can speak volumes to the AdCom member about your ability to function in a team. So again, all three of these scenarios, the shark, the peacock, the wallflower, you don't want to be any of these people. And again, I hope it's obvious to you why you don't. If you find yourself sort of gravitating naturally towards one of those behaviors, it's okay. Get some feedback, talk to people who know you well and find out if you have these tendencies. If you do, we've discussed how you can manage them in the course of this exercise. And if you come across one of these types of people in your TBD, don't see it as a sinking ship, I got screwed. Not at all. In fact, it is an opportunity for you to show how skilled you are at dealing with different types of conflict or different types of group dynamics. Okay, I'm just going to pause here real quick. Again, apologies, guys. I'm going to switch screens just to make sure. Okay, looks like we're okay on the streaming. Just want to make sure there were no problems. Now, the rest of this discussion, we're going to focus a bit more on advice on specific tips for different parts of this interview, and again, how to prepare. I'm only going to touch on this very briefly, the individual interview. So if you remember when we talked about the mechanics of the TBD, you have the bulk of it, 35 minutes. It's going to be that team virtual conference. And then again, you'll be put in a waiting room and then called back in random order, one at a time, and you'll have 10 minutes with the AdCom facilitator. The purpose of this, again, 10 minutes is really short if you think about it, right? So the only things you're going to accomplish are, number one, a very quick debrief of the TBD. So the facilitator is going to ask you, what were your impressions of that? How do you think the conversation went? I think it's important that you have something specific to say about the TBD when you're asked this question, right? So a bad answer would be, oh, it was great. We came to recommendation. I loved everybody I met and it went super well. That's very vague. Anybody could say that same thing, right? So I think it's more important as you go through the TBD, again, take notes, have a little notebook off on the side and a pen, a piece of paper. If there was a turning point in the conversation that you noticed where all of a sudden the team started to gel, that might be something you want to comment on in your individual interview. Say, it really struck me how when so-and-so mentioned this point, that was really this moment when the momentum shifted in the room, right? So you're demonstrating that you have the awareness of the group dynamic. You know how to identify these shifts in the pace and the direction of the conversation, or you might even notice the mechanisms at play, right? When so-and-so said something, if, almost like a cause and effect, this is what happened, right? So I think demonstrating that you are aware of that dynamic and how it played out in your specific TBD, that's the kind of thing that's going to show the AdCom member that you really, you're really skilled at this. It also don't feel afraid to give constructive criticism of the TBD either. Not the TBD as an exercise, right? That you have to accept that framework, but the specific team discussion that you had. Perhaps there was somewhere where it got derailed. Don't be afraid to call that out. And as long as you have some sort of solution, right? And you say, I realized that where we really got off the tracks for 10 minutes was, when there was this conflict between 2 points of view. We didn't know how to resolve it until such and such a moment, something happened, somebody said something, someone made a compromise. And then, then we were able to reach a conclusion. And so what that teaches me is that in a, group-based discussion, it's extremely important that, fill in the blank. Some sort of analysis is going to be really critical here. So again, it's quick. You don't have to go into great detail, but be taking notes and be sharp about it. The other thing is the AdCom member will probably ask you, most likely you'll have time for one question, maybe two. And the questions that we're hearing feedback from applicants we've spoken to that are most common are why Wharton and why an MBA? Perhaps they'll ask, why now? Why do you want an MBA at this point in your career? Or maybe why an MBA from Wharton? So these are pretty basic questions. You answered these in your personal statements that you submitted with your application. So you should have, pretty good, well-developed answer to this already. Again, keep in mind, it's only 10 minutes. So most likely you only get to make 1 or 2 points before you need to wrap up. But again, be as specific as you possibly can. Talk about why you think Wharton / an MBA at this point in time makes so much sense for your career trajectory. This would be one place where you can bring up your career goals. You can say, look, I'm coming from this background, but what I realize is I really want to be doing X, Y, and Z in a different field or in a different type of corporate function. And I really think Wharton's faculty in managerial operations or Wharton's, active student body in the consulting space are really going to be the tools that I need to make that shift, right? So have an answer that is specific to you in your career journey. Finally, if there's something really extraordinary about your background or something highly unique to your situation that you want to make sure you have a chance to say to an AdCom member, this is it, right? This is the opportunity. Again, don't be long-winded. Make sure it's concise, maybe a couple of sentences. But yes, feel free to, this is going to be your last opportunity to give the AdCom information that you haven't already. Hopefully you have, you've covered it in your application. But for example, if you've gotten a promotion since you submitted your application, this would be a great place to bring that up, right? So it really should be something that goes above and beyond your application materials because they've already seen that. So don't waste time reiterating what's already in your application. But if it's something that's new news or a big change since you submitted your application, feel free to mention it during the 10-minute interview. All right. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, for better or worse, all of you are in the position where you're doing this TBD virtually. And it's different. If we were talking about the TBD and under normal circumstances, I would have a slide here about how to master the room physically, right? When you're present with 4 or 5 other candidates and a facilitator. This screen is now about the virtual TBD and some tips that are specific to how to make sure you can ace that through a Zoom screen. It's no different from all the video conferences that you've done over the last year for your workplaces. I'm sure you've done all the different types of forums, Zoom, Google Meet, Teams, Skype, whatever it may be. And again, not only when you are preparing, don't just think back to your own experience in these video conferencing tools, but also what you've observed other people doing, right? Your colleagues, your peers, your direct reports, your supervisors. I'm sure you've all noticed and picked up on habits or behaviors that are positive or negative. So think back, do a little mental cataloging of what, someone who's just really sharp on video conference, what do they do differently from other people? Or someone who's really terrible at video conferencing, right? Make sure you keep in mind those, they're just small habits, basically, small little details that can really make a difference here. Let's get into some specifics. Technical settings. Make sure you have a reliable internet connection. I imagine for many of you, this won't be a problem, but do make sure that, you've tested it thoroughly, especially on the day of, and, you've rebooted your computer and you've just made sure that there aren't going to be any technical glitches. And I think Wharton actually asks you to log onto the virtual conferencing tool early just to make sure that if you do have an issue, you have time to fix it before it impacts the actual TBD. Audio connection, same thing. Typically, if you do have a microphone, it could be as simple as earbuds like I'm wearing, or it could be an external microphone. That usually gets you a clearer connection than if you are not using any sort of mic at all and you're just talking to your laptop. You will have a clearer audio connection. So make sure you test that. Get a friend, get them on Skype or get them on Zoom and just make sure that they can hear you really clearly. Camera height and angle. And by the way, you don't need to panic about any of these things. If you don't have an external microphone, that's okay. Just do the best with the tools that you have. You don't have to go out there and buy, invest in all these fancy peripherals from Best Buy just for this interview. You use what you have, but make the best of what you do, what you do own. Camera height and angle. I usually just use the camera that's built into my MacBook, but make sure that you sort of adjust that for optimal angle. Lighting, we all have heard about this, right? I think you guys are all pros at that now. Same thing with the background that's behind you. Make sure it's clear, make sure no one's going to be walking behind you. There's no pets, no children. Just for 45 minutes, you just want some privacy and some peace. Same thing with the background noise, right? That can be extremely distracting. And ideally, I would say in an ideal situation, you don't have to be muting and unmuting yourself during the whole 45 minutes, or I should say the 35 minutes of the team-based discussion. That's fine if you have to do it for whatever reason, but it can be a little bit distracting. And if you mess it up, and you think you're on mute and you're not, that's just not ideal. So ideally, it's a quiet space where you don't have to mute yourself. You can just be listening as you would be in a normal in-person meeting. Attire, we do recommend you wear business formal, at a very minimum business casual. So for men, button-down shirt with a tie, ideally, or a jacket, not required, but I'd say it does look sharpest if you do have a jacket. And for women, something similar could be a blazer or a nice sweater up top, or a dress. And do wear business attire on the top and the bottom, right? Just in case you have to get up to adjust something, turn on a light, or you have to close the blinds on your window, and someone sees, that you're wearing boxer shorts. Not great, right? So just put on the full suit for this particular occasion. It's only for 45 minutes. The other thing I want to mention to you, and again, many of you will have observed this in doing 12 months of video conference calls. Remember that in communication, if you talk to people who study communication, right, they say it could be up to 90% of communication between human beings is actually body language, right, which includes facial expression, eye contact. Are you smiling? Are you frowning? Your hand gestures. Video conference flattens that, right? It becomes more two-dimensional when you don't have that human connection. There's a slight time delay also with the internet connection. It's not quite the same, but it is still an extremely important part of how you are presenting yourself, and how you're presenting yourself not only when you're speaking, but also when you're listening. So be very mindful of, the camera is always on. So even if you're not talking, you're just taking notes or you're listening to your teammates, they can see you, right? And the AdCom member is also, don't assume that all eyes are on the speaker at all times. And again, that's a tip for you as well. You should be eyeballing, the gallery where everyone's photo is, or everyone's video image rather. And see, how are people reacting to what you're saying or what someone else is saying, right? Take note of that and see how you can use that to further the team-based discussion. But again, remember, when you're listening, be mindful that the camera is on. And so watch your facial expression. If you're somebody who's very emotive, make sure that you're keeping a pretty neutral face. And you want to remain engaged and interested, right? So what you don't want to be doing is staring off into space, looking off to the side when it's not your turn to talk. People can see that. And it's very important that you, throughout the entire 35 minutes, which is not a long period of time, you act as if you are fully absorbed and participating in the discussion, even when you're not talking. Okay, so I actually think that brings us to the end of the prepared content that I had for you. I'm going to just stop. Well, let me see. I'm going to have to stop sharing my screen so that I can see your guys' questions. So give me 1 second here while I switch. And okay, so feel free to type in. I think you guys have hopefully all seen the where you can enter a chat in the YouTube live stream. And let me see if there's any questions. Right. Okay. So we have one question that's coming already from MSD DSM. Thank you. Are there any trusted sources where you can take mock TBDs? Does Admissionado conduct any such mock sessions? Admissionado doesn't have a specific Wharton TBD mock discussion. I know some other admissions companies, if you look on GMAT Club and you look at the list of admissions consulting partners that they work with, some of them may be offering mock sessions. It's often something you have to sign up for in advance. And so many slots might be taken, but you can certainly take a look at the list of partners that GMAT Club works with. We do not specifically offer this, but we do offer an interview prep package. And so that is something, and if you want to tailor that interview prep package specifically to Wharton, that's something we can do with you. It would be a one-on-one rather than a group session. we find that our clients typically, just for anonymity and privacy, they would rather not participate in a group discussion, and they want to keep it one-on-one with their consultants. So we certainly have the resources to help you prepare for that specifically if you want to work on the Wharton TBD. So feel free to contact us. And at the very end, I'll put my screen back up and it'll have our contact details at our website, our info at email address. Feel free to ping us. We're on 24/7, and so we'll get back to you really quickly. I know this is time sensitive, so feel free to talk to us about that. But again, if you're looking for like a mock format, I would point you towards the other partners on GMAT Club. Some of them do offer that. Thank you. And Abhijit from GMAT Club has posted our interview prep services page on our website. Thank you for doing that, Abhijit. Okay, we have a question from Valshak. How does it look if you're taking notes while others are speaking? Good question. Obviously depends on how you're taking notes. You don't want it to be very distracting. I would say don't be, ideally, I'm somebody who loves to take notes on my computer during video conferences, but this is not the right time to do that because, again, if you're not on mute and you're typing, everyone's going to hear that. It will be distracting. My recommendation is you just keep a small notebook or a small piece of paper right to the side of your laptop or your computer, and just a pen. And again, you're not going to be taking long form notes. Most likely it's going to be a couple of quick bullet points, shorthand, just to help you remember what somebody said. But again, the point is not to document in full the entire conversation, right? The point is to, if somebody says something that gives you an idea or makes a comment that you want to come back to, that's what you want to jot down, right? So we're talking about just a few seconds of something quickly writing. And I think as long as you, you're clearly writing and then you come right back to your camera, it's going to be obvious to the rest of the group that you're taking notes as part of the discussion rather than, you're distracted with something else on your phone or on your computer. So I think it's, I will tell you, I also teach, I teach classes at Cornell at the Johnson Business School, and I love it when I see my students, I can tell they're writing. It shows that they're engaged and they're paying attention. Ava Zoe has asked, how many minutes shall we reserve for the presentation? So I assume, Ava, that you're referring to the group presentation at the very end, right? Because you have the 1 minute, you have 60 seconds individually at the beginning, not for presentation, but for some sort of opening statement. So I think you're referring to, okay, once you've finished the team-based discussion and there's a presentation at the end, how much time is that supposed to take? That's going to depend quite a bit on the group dynamic, right? So if you're in the middle of a very fruitful discussion with your teammates and you really feel that it's highly constructive, you may not want to put a hard stop to that, cut that off just to make sure you have, X number of minutes at the end for a presentation. However, as a rule of thumb, I would, make sure you're keeping an eye on the clock the entire time. I would say when there's, so let's say if everyone gives a minute at the beginning and there's 5 people in the room, that's 5 minutes, right? That leaves 30 minutes before the individual interviews begin. I would say once you get down to 10 minutes left of that 30-minute period, you should be, if you're not already there as a group, that might be a good time for you to sort of jump in and remind everybody, hey, the admissions committee member would like to hear a recommendation before the end of the session. Why don't we start wrapping up because we only have 10 minutes left, right? So I think if you spend the last approximately 4 to 5 minutes as a group on the actual presentation part, that's a pretty good ballpark, right? It's not going to be longer than that. Doesn't make sense just because it's a short discussion. And then shorter than that, you're probably going to be compromising the quality of the recommendation. So I would say, again, when there's about 10 minutes left, if you're watching the clock, that would be a good time to begin switching gears into presentation mode, and then maybe aim for about 4 to 5 minutes at the end for the actual presentation. Okay, I think Ava had another question about any advice on how to pick one of the teammates. And then I think she went on to elaborate on that. Any advice on how to decide whose idea to pick and build upon in the beginning as a group? So I'm going to kind of take those questions together. In terms of if you're thinking about, okay, how do I build rapport with some of the, the other candidates in the room? One way to do it is to simply see, based on content, right? So did they propose an idea that you think is complementary to your idea, or that perhaps the exact same as your idea, right? So it gives you a sort of substantive connection with that person, and perhaps you can build a bit of an alliance and you can put forth your idea that way. Another one is you might simply, we've all experienced this, you might simply vibe with somebody where you feel like, wow, like just something about that person's personality really speaks to me, and I really love to, we just have a really good dynamic, and that can be, that sort of positive connection can actually be contagious in a good way for the entire group, right? So I think it's one of those things that you're not going to know it until you see it. and someone says something and it just clicks for you, or whether what they say or the way they say it could really resonate with you. So just be on the lookout for that. But I would say it's not something you necessarily can prepare for in advance, because you really don't know who the other 4 or 5 people are going to be and what they're going to be like. So again, think back to in real life situations you've been in. You've been in the boat where you really connected somebody over what they said or how they said it. So that's exactly the same kind of spark that you want to look for. And if you don't find it, that's totally okay. A twist on that answer, how do you decide whose idea to pick on and build upon beginning as a group? This, again, is going to depend on the dynamic of the group. It may be the case, luck of the draw, where more than one of you comes to the discussion with the same or a similar idea, and just naturally the majority kind of says, oh, okay, well, if 3 of us have said the same idea, it sort of makes sense to go in that direction. Or if they're complementary ideas, same thing. You could also be in a situation, however, where all 5 or 6 ideas are completely different. Again, it's hard. It's difficult to predict how this is going to go. My advice to you would be to read the room, right? So this is a very important skill in any sort of team-based setting, is to be able to be perceptive enough about the dynamics, not only of each individual participant, where do they stand? Do they feel strongly about their position, or do they feel like open to compromise? You have to be perceptive about that, but you also be perceptive about how the dynamics are forming, right? Do you feel a conflict brewing? Can you sort of see that 2 people are on a collision course? Or do you feel like the group is very amenable to just coming to some sort of compromise or some sort of agreement early on? It's really going to depend on, I would say those opening remarks are very telling, because if you're taking careful notes, whether mentally or on a piece of paper, you might spot trends and patterns at that point in time. And then again, I would say the few minutes of discussion following the opening remarks, that's going to be, the proof is in that pudding. You're going to just detect right away if this is going to be, the group is going to coalesce around a certain idea, or if there's going to be some serious compromise. And it's going to depend on how the other candidates behave too. So it's difficult to prepare for specifically, but I would say, work on and even in the next few days before your scheduled TBD, if you're going to be in other video conference meetings for work, like pay attention to this, like pay attention to how different people behave and how it leads to certain outcomes, right? It's like an intuition that you probably have developed at this point in your career. Apply that same intuition to the situation, right? And try to really pick up on those signals that people are sending. They're like psychological and emotional signals, and then that should guide you in your decision. So don't go in with a formed opinion about how something's going to go, because you really don't know. That's the randomness of being in a group. It's most important. My advice to you would be to be adaptable and flexible. Okay, Adiola Ajayi has asked, with only 1 minute, what should your opening statement contain? Should it only be about your response to the prompt? That's a great question. 1 minute is extremely short. And I would recommend that in advance, you actually write out the points that you want to make. I wouldn't suggest writing a full script, because if you sound like you've memorized something, it can be very robotic, especially over a video conference, right? You want it to sound natural and more conversational. So do write down in advance. Maybe it's just 3 or 4 bullet points that to remind you, like a prompt, what you want to say. But the bulk of your 1 minute remarks should be focused on your actual recommendation, right? The response that you have to the prompt about young alumni engagement and how to increase that participation from the alumni base. It is a great opportunity, though, to perhaps, for example, again, maybe your idea is coming from something you've seen in the workplace, right? Where you had to work on employee engagement and you saw how your company handled it, or maybe you were even part of an initiative from the people team or the culture team to get involved in employee engagement. And maybe that's informing your suggestion for this prompt. That's a great time to mention, I learned through leading employee engagement at my employer, blah, blah, blah. And you can mention the specific name or not, if you're not comfortable telling people where you work. I learned that people really respond well to X, Y, or Z, right? And then you segue into the actual idea. So it can be a great way to insert a couple of relevant facts about yourself, your background, work that you've done that you think is directly relevant to the topic at hand. Don't spend time going through any of the parts of your resume that are not relevant to this topic. And that, again, think about the Peacock, right? That's going to come across as, oh, this person just wants to make sure that they say their piece, right? That's not going to be helpful to you. In fact, that's probably more likely going to be damaging. So do keep it focused on the prompt. But if there's personal elements from your background or story that are relevant to what you're recommending to the team, great. That's a great place to bring it up. Any other questions? All right, looks like that's it. Again, this recording should be posted on GMAT Club, so if you'd like to come back to this anytime and in the next week or so, it should be available for you. And again, my parting words to all of you is it's just like work. It's just like all the team video conferences you've been in a workplace setting. Think about those experiences that you've had. Think about, again, how you've observed other people behaving in those settings and bring that to bear on this exercise. It's really the exact same thing. And if you can do well in a work group setting, you're going to do well here as well. And have fun with it. It's actually a really neat opportunity to meet some other potential future classmates of yours. Most of the time you don't get to do that. So go into it, try to find an ally or two in the group. Maybe you'll even make a contact that you end up staying in touch with, which would be really cool. So thank you again very much, everybody, and have a great day. Good luck to all of you who are going to be doing the TBD.